terms. It can be easy to assume that we know what a culture is, but if we don't have a good definition, we certainly can't define what multiculturalism is. Further, without a good definition of culture, it can be challenging to say how it does or does not affect our behavior. Unfortunately, it can be very easy to turn to stereotypes and make assumptions about a person's expected behavior or inherent character based on incorrect or incomplete understandings of not only their culture, but of what culture generally is. It is not uncommon for people to approach what is unfamiliar to us with a certain amount of suspicion. That can be true of absolutely anyone, although there is a certain truth to the idea that more frequently have to adjust to a majoritarian or hegemonic culture than the other way around. This is all in part because the sense of what is familiar to us has to do with very deep brain structures. When people with high self-reported levels of xenophobia are shown triggering stimuli while being given a brain scan, you see abnormal amounts of activity in those structures. It's among the reasons why this is such a difficult topic to broach or even certainly overcome. Having said that, there are strategies that can and should foster multicultural competence. So a good definition of culture can be a shared pattern of behaviors, interactions, proclivities, and understandings that are learned over the course of our life through our social interactions with other people. The good news is that culture is quite malleable. It has a lot to do with the kinds of social interactions we have. A prime example of this can be language, and not simply which language you are using, but how are you using it. One of my favorite scientific papers that I've ever read comes from my time studying forensic psychology, in part because it's one of the only scientific papers I've ever read that has a good title. And I include my own scientific work in that. My own academic papers all have terrible titles. Most scientific papers do. They just have bad titles. This one is called the Thin Blue Waveform. It was studied why it is that so many interactions between police and particularly minority communities wind up escalating to very negative outcomes. The theory of the paper is that because of differences in prosody, which is the sum total of how we use our voice, the accent, diction, timbre, cadence, and each side would be more likely to interpret the other side as being challenging or uncivil just because it's not familiar. And you can quantify this in a waveform. Sometimes neither side truly intended to raise things to where they become aggressive. All this can be measured quantitatively. It can get graphed. We use prosody to define ourselves as part of an in-group. And this is not just minority communities who are doing that. Cops have a tendency to sound like cops. So you iterate these misinterpretations over and over again, and sometimes very bad things happen. And it all started with a broken taillight or something like that. The iceberg is also a good metaphor for the human psyche, because if psychology has proven anything, it is that the vast majority of our cognitive and phenomenological processes occur below the level of awareness. It's below the one. The conscious part that we are, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Most of us is unseen. So, when we talk about multiculturalism, it is not the same thing as talking about diversity. Diversity is merely a descriptor, whereas multicultural is perhaps more properly understood as an approach or an attitude. There are plenty of places in the world that could be described as plural societies, which is a term first coined by J.S. Furnival, who was an administrator in India. In a plural society, disparate groups share a geographic area and probably an infrastructure, and that's about it. In other words, they share the sidewalk and nothing else. They socialize very little, they intermarry even less. The political gulfs between them are often vast and sometimes insurmountable. These are often not healthy societies. These are diverse societies. They are not multicultural. The difference being that in a multicultural society, the diversity is supported, even celebrated. The United States is very far from an idealized society, but ask yourself how far out of your way you would have to go to find an ethnic restaurant, or a minority-owned business, or a neighbor from a different spiritual tradition. Probably not very far. And when you got there, you would probably be safe. If multiculturalism is the attitude, then multicultural competence is the skill set. It does have to be learned. It starts with awareness, followed by a knowledge base before you can even start to build those skills. It's actually not entirely fair to expect people to just know how to do it. If you walked up to someone who had never seen a bicycle in their entire life, you wouldn't just say, okay, hop on. If they did, and then they fell over trying to ride it, you wouldn't say, well, you crashed because you're a bad person. I have lived all over the United States and inhabited pretty much every rung of the economic ladder, save being a billionaire, which sounds nice. My personal multicultural competence absolutely remains a work in progress. This is the work of generation, and it is not realistic to expect progress to be linear. The situation is not entirely without hope. Unfortunately, we have to remember how some of multiculturalism is a conscious effort to work against, or at least at odds with, very old and very deep brain structures which give us our sense of the familiar. One of the problems with my previous metaphor, riding a bicycle, is that it assumes that there is a bicycle, which can be ridden. So far, we have yet to perfect any sort of multicultural skill set on which people can be easily educated. One approach to fostering multicultural competence that I think gets short shrift is not to claim that we have built this really great bicycle, and if you don't know how to ride it, it's because you're a failed human being, but rather to point to the ostensible hegemonic monoculture and say, you don't got a bicycle either. Our cultural memory is pretty short. If you had gone to, say, Ohio in the early 20th century and asked people about their identity, they very likely would have described themselves as German Americans. Then World War I happened, and that got de-emphasized. Suddenly, they were white. If you took one of those people and you brought them to the shack in the mountains of Vermont, where my mother's grandmother had 15 kids who survived, and asked, okay, is she white? They would have said, absolutely, obviously not. That person is Scots-Irish. That's different. Along with Italians and Jews, many people that we currently talk about as being white would not have been considered white not that long ago. Our Eurocentric bias on what is considered white is also thoroughly ahistorical. Certain groups in China and the Middle East also very much thought of themselves as white. They were also usually among the upper echelons of their society. Contrasting multicultural identities against a hegemonic polity still empowers the hegemon. Nor can the hegemon take all the responsibility for trying to be multicultural. That also gives all the power to the hegemon. I don't think that's the right approach. It might be more effective to deconstruct the hegemon. It hasn't been around that long in its current form. If anything, the current ascendancy or apparent ascendancy of white Christian nationalism indicates fragility rather than strength. Among its key figures is White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller, who is descended from Jewish survivors of the Holocaust. Members of his own family say he has betrayed his heritage. This is not a social movement with legs, and we should be smarter about cutting them out from underneath them. Deconstructing the hegemon seems like potentially our strongest strategy for improving inclusion and multicultural competence. In talking about deconstructing the hegemon, denying its valence, saying the emperor has no clothes, it should not be taken as denying how destructive the hegemon has been and can be. The U.S., if not perfect, is more multicultural than some other places. Even if that is a given, it is not difficult at all to find examples of the hegemon acting very much like a hegemon. When we do not encourage multicultural competence, incidents of cultural intolerance, meaning if we did not work on our multicultural competence, even ineffectively, there would likely be fewer violent and extreme incidents than might otherwise occur. To go back to the bicycle metaphor, the first bicycles we invented didn't work that well. Perhaps it is also worth mentioning that it was a couple of bicycle mechanics who made it possible to fly, who discovered the principles of flight, now used 100,000 times a day. Principles of flight that allowed the space shuttle to deliver the Hubble Space Telescope into orbit and then return safely to Earth. Among the concerns that are brought up in pursuit of multicultural competence is its role in the workplace. This is indeed important and probably high among the most immediate concerns of the average person. However, managing the production and sale of widgets for profit may not be humanity's most pressing concern going forward. Deterring microaggressions in the name of free market capitalism has value, but it does not threaten human dignity to the same degree as global climate change. In some of the worst case scenarios, by 2150, roughly 10% of the total human population will be displaced by rising sea levels. In a far worse scenario, fully 1/3 of humanity's 8 billion people may be displaced by rising heat, water scarcity, and crop failure in the same time frame. The refugee crises we have endured up to this point will seem very minor, perhaps even quaint, by our descendants in such a world. That we are currently handling it so poorly does not bode well. Multicultural competence is a skill set best fostered as early as possible. Most public schools are already diverse places. Whether or not they are multicultural is a different question. Holiday break patterns tend to adhere to and even celebrate mostly Christian observances. It can give children the subliminal impression that such observances are normative and other traditions are strange or even deviant. Many holidays already fall outside of the Judeo-Christian canon. Halloween, one of my favorites, is actually derived from a Scots-Irish tradition, which refuses to abandon its pagan roots. Most children are already fully aware of Halloween and have a great affection for it. Halloween involves a supraordinate goal, irrespective of cultural background. Get candy. The goal itself is not the important part. It's the supraordinate nature of the goal. Muzaffar Sharif said this is basically the only way to bring disparate groups together and reduce conflict. You need a goal that everyone can get behind, and a lot of this sense of in-group and out-group goes away. Every day, the workplace becomes more globalized. Efforts to improve multicultural competence in the workplace have shown greater efficacy than efforts in other contexts. This is possibly because being commercial is a supraordinate goal. Everyone is trying to make money. The same way kids on Halloween form roving multicultural bands in fearful costumes in the pursuit of candy, multicultural businesses are after money. When you get down to it, it's not that hard to motivate people. Leadership commitment to the effort and the necessity of collaboration towards specific economic outcomes are key factors. Anecdotally, change in formerly racist attitudes has been reported as people of different backgrounds work together to achieve a supraordinate goal. Emphasizing mutual qualities seems more effective than highlighting differences. Critical to the process is establishing inclusive communication practices and encouraging critical self-awareness. Fostering multicultural competence cannot merely be a single weekend seminar. It is an ongoing, active, living process where all participants feel comfortable in expressing themselves. There's another area where it is very easy to underestimate how well multicultural competence is going. The military. I am not saying that there aren't problems or that there haven't been incidents which can be quite severe and really shocking. The U.S. military is one of the most racially and ethnically diverse institutions of any side in the entire world. The Army announced that it had successfully eliminated any racial differences in fighting effectiveness and achieved full interoperability between its forces regardless of cultural background in 1960. The current attempt to make U.S. forces a Caucasian monoculture is nothing short of delusional and fantastically dangerous. If multicultural recruits are dissuaded from joining in significant numbers, at the same time that we are isolating ourselves from our traditional international alliances, the U.S. military will simply collapse. This is not hyperbole. It will collapse based on a simple lack of manpower and lack of credibility. That could go away. It may already have. There is no question but that we find ourselves in a unique and decidedly difficult moment in history. In contrast to the message very explicitly being conveyed by those in power, multiculturalism is actually an American strength. When compared to many other places in the world, we do it better and have been for longer. That is not to discount the struggles in our past, which are to be expected, really. I don't mean to downplay any suffering that has resulted from intolerance and still does. How spiritually impoverished would America be were it not for our multicultural inclination? Without jazz music, there would be no rock and roll. The earliest explorers of this continent encountered native people whose philosophies directly inspired the Enlightenment. Foreign cuisines have expanded the average American palate to an inestimable degree. Without multiculturalism, we would not have pizza. Multiculturalism, diversity, equity, inclusion must not be thought of as things that take away from anything about being an American, but rather have always and consistently added to it. Again, diversity is a mere descriptor. Multiculturalism is an approach, and more importantly, a skill set, which can be actively developed. Indeed, given the challenges we currently face and the ones we can expect to face relatively soon, circumstances require that we develop that skill set fast. We are only in the early days of trying to do so. And if it is not going that well, at least not as well as we might hope, that is not an excuse to stop trying. One day, perhaps, it will be as easy